Good morning. As Associate Curator of the Body Museum, I would like to welcome you all to today's lecture. I'd first like to introduce Body Museum Assistant Curator Jessica Johnson to read our land statement.
Hello, everyone. We would like to begin by acknowledging that Berkeley, California is on the territory of the Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenua Ohlone.
Thank you, Jessica. I would now like to introduce today's speaker. Solange Ashby received her PhD in Egyptology with a specialization in ancient Egyptian language and Nubian religion from the University of Chicago. Dr. Ashby's expertise in sacred ancient languages, including Egyptian hieroglyphs, Demotic and Coptic, Ethiopic, Biblical Greek, and Biblical Hebrew, underpins her research into the history of religious transformations in Northeast Africa. Her first book, Calling Out to Isis, The Enduring Nubian Presence at Philae, explores the Temple of Philae's history as a Nubian sacred site. Dr. Ashby has been awarded a President's Postdoctoral Fellowship at the University of California, Los Angeles. Her current research describes the roles of women, queens, priestesses, mothers in traditional Nubian societies. In 2023, Dr. Ashby will join the faculty of the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures at UCLA, where she will teach Egyptology and Nubian studies. She is a founding member of the William Leo Hansberry Society, which seeks to create pathways for people of African descent on the continent and in the diaspora to engage in the study of African antiquity. Today, she will be speaking to us about priestesses, queens, goddesses, women of Nubia. Take it away, Solange.
All right, thank you. Let me just share my screen. All right, so I would like to just start by thanking the folks at the Bade Museum and the ARF at UC Berkeley for inviting me to take part in their symposium on gender performance in the ancient world. I'm really happy that the queens of Nubia are going to be part of this discussion. So let me just get started. I have gotten in the habit of using this beautiful painting by Armonia Rosales, an Afro-Cuban American painter, called The Virgin, to just sort of set the tone, because I feel that this image collects or gathers so much of what is important and noteworthy about these queens from ancient Nubia. So this woman in the image, I should be clear, is not an ancient Nubian queen. However, her forthright gaze, her bared breast, the obvious fact of her maternity and how powerfully she's connected to her infant, together with the golden halo around her head, showing her sanctity, all bring to mind really important elements of the queens of ancient Nubia. And I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge my friend and colleague, Deborah Hurd, with whom I was a graduate student at University of Chicago. It was from Deborah at Chicago that I first heard about these ancient Nubian queens. Okay, so first, to get us situated in time and space, I want to point out that the land of Nubia, this ancient territory, is now divided between Egypt in the north and Sudan in the south, both located in the northeast corner of the African continent, and really centered on the Nile River, which, it's important to remember, flows from south in the heartland of the African continent north to finally dump or release at the delta in the Mediterranean Sea. So Nubia is bounded, traditionally conceived of as a land bounded on the north at the First Cataract, which is there at the city of Aswan, an ancient city that is still a modern city in Egypt, and the site of the ancient temple of Philae. And then on the south at the sixth cataract, which is the general vicinity of the ancient city of Meroe. So what is a cataract, you might ask? It is a region of the Nile River that is interrupted, if you will, by boulders, both under the surface of the water and strewn along the path of the river that creates eddies and tidal pools and sometimes even small waterfalls and makes passage to boat traffic difficult and dangerous. And so this was an area in antiquity, and well, I'll just say in antiquity, where boats had to be disassembled and taken out, carried around the cataract, reassembled in order for the river journey to continue. So this ended up to be an important place for cities and trade markets to be established. And we see that in the land of Nubia, we have three chronological capitals that all together are referred to as the Kingdom of Kush. And so this very earliest capital is located at the third cataract and called Kerma. The next subsequent capital was located at the fourth cataract and called Napata. And the final capital was located right around the sixth cataract and called Meroe. And I want to share these dates so you have an idea of the incredible longevity of the Kingdom of Kush. And so it very much parallels what we see in Egyptian antiquity. But Kerma is that oldest, lasting for about 1,000 years. And then there's a break where Egypt is controlling Nubia. And so there's no indigenous kingdom. But then when Egypt falls on hard times and the third intermediate period begins, we have Napata arising and the 25th dynasty kings who then conquer and rule Egypt for a period. And then finally, we get to the Kingdom of Meroe, which is where we encounter these sole ruling queens that I will talk about today. So, Meroe. I want to lead with saying that it was contemporary with first Ptolemaic Greek rule in Egypt, that was the last ruler being Cleopatra VII, and then Roman rule, where we have Octavian, who later becomes Caesar Augustus, conquering Egypt and maintaining Roman rule in Egypt for about 3 centuries. And I use this beautiful photograph by Chester Higgins Jr. of royal burials at the North Cemetery in Meroe to depict this phase. So what you see in the background is a steep-sided pyramid under which all of the rulers were buried. And then in the foreground, jutting out on the east side, a monumental gateway. I was saying, yes, this monumental gateway fronts a funerary chapel that jutted out from the east side of all of these royal burials. And we'll look at some imagery from the interior of these funerary chapels as we proceed. So just to introduce the 5 queens that I'll focus on today, and that's not to say that there weren't other Meroitic queens, but these I will focus on, and they lived sometime around 50 BC to about 100 of the Common Era, or AD. And their names are Nahirko, about whom I don't know much, so I'm not going to say much about her today, but then followed by Amanirenas, who was followed by Amanishakheto, and then Nawidamak, and finally Amanitore. And you'll see that I've noted titles for 4 of these queens. And so at the bottom, you can see that the Meroitic title Kore means the ruler. And so in this ungendered language, it can be used for a male or a female ruler, just with the idea that this is the paramount leader of the kingdom, the sole ruler. And then the more gendered title is kandake, which probably means queen mother, and was held by a series of very powerful women who also had their own spheres of influence within the royal family. And to illustrate this, I just used the image of Amanitore on the right from a stone bark shrine that was found at the sacred site of Wad Ben Naka, and I'll show you where that is, very close to Meroe. But in it, again, we see her with her arms upraised. She's literally holding up the sky. You can see stars, I hope, along the top there. She has her breast bared, again, much like the image of the Virgin that I used to open this talk. I hope you can see around her neck, she's wearing a necklace comprised of 3 ram's heads that make reference to the ram god Amun, his Nubian manifestation. And I should just say, for those who don't know, a bark shrine just provided a place to sit and rest a sacred boat that was used in ritual processions in the Meroitic rites. So with this table taken from Claude Rie, French scholar who does a lot with the Meroitic language, I want to illustrate multiple things. That being first, that there were not only ruling queens, but also ruling kings. Since I focus on and present about the queens, I often get asked, were there any kings in Meroe? And yes, indeed. So in this list, you'll see that the names that don't have reine for queen in French before them are ruling kings. And then the other thing I want to show with this table is how uncertain we are about the specific dates of the reigns of these various Meroitic kings and queens. And then the other thing that I will show you in just a minute is how the burials seem to really alternate between at the south, at the current capital city of Meroe, and then sometimes being rulers being buried up again at the Fourth Cataract, at the older capital city of Napata, and site of a sacred site dedicated to Amun, that ram-headed god that's so closely related to Nubian royalty. So let's just start here. I'm going to point out, after these 2 kings, Adi Kalamani and Tabirko, we have this first sole ruling queen named Nahirko. And she's buried at the North Cemetery at Meroe. This abbreviation stands for Begarawia North, and her burial is numbered 11. She's followed then by 2 kings, and then after that, an unknown queen whose name is not preserved, who's buried now up again at the Fourth Cataract, so up to the north at the old capital. This unknown queen then is followed by 2 male rulers again, and then we have Queen Amani Reinas, who also likely, but unsure, is buried in the north at Jebel Barco. Taritakas is the spouse of Amani Reinas, and Akinidad probably was their heir. After that pair of 3 royal rulers, then we have Queen Amanishakheto, who is buried now in the traditional royal cemetery at Meroe. And then Nawidamak, again buried at the Fourth Cataract at Jebel Barkal number 6. And then Queen Amanitore, who ruled with a co-ruler listed immediately below her, Natakamani, who was either her husband, as we used to say, or her son, as Claude-Gris has recently proposed. And she is buried in that North Cemetery at Meroe. So I'd like to just now zoom in on the North Cemetery at Meroe, Begarawia North, and show you 3 of, I think, almost 60 royal burials at this North Cemetery. These 3 are up on a ridge with a beautiful view to the east, so facing the rising sun, and you'll see that they're very steep-sided pyramids, each of which is fronted by a funerary chapel. This first one, Begarawia North 11, is the one that has a double pylon, so 2 monumental gates. And as I believe I mentioned, the interior of these funerary chapels then are decorated with scenes of the funerary rites performed for the deceased ruler. So this is the burial place of Queen Nahirko now, according to Claude-Gris. Begarawia North 12 is where her son was buried, and then yet another ruler to the right in Begarawia North 13. And you'll see that they're very similar looking royal pyramid burials at the Fourth Cataract, so at this site of Jebel Barkal. And you can see in the background that raised plateau in the back is the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal, and then along behind it, where you see the greenery in this otherwise desolate land, is where the Nile River is flowing. And so it is an open question why some of these ruling queens chose to be buried at this cemetery at the Fourth Cataract. I should also point out that these steep-sided pyramids also had funerary chapels to their east side. They're largely destroyed now, so you can't see them, but the early explorers did record the decorated interior walls of these funerary chapels, and we'll see one for Queen Nawidamak. In fact, it was used to advertise this talk, so you've already seen it. Okay, so let's get started with this very early unnamed queen. I just love this sculpture, and so I'm including it, even though she's not one of the queens that I'm focusing on. This powerful piece is at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, which really has the largest Nubian collection in the United States and one of the largest in the world. And so in the center, we see the queen in this very typical voluptuous, thick, curvaceous shape that was considered beautiful and also conveyed power, and may in fact have been how the queens actually looked. She is wearing 2 rearing cobras called uraei on her brow at the front of her crown. She has on a beautiful ball bead necklace that probably has the ram head of Amun as its centerpiece. And she's holding in her hand something that Nubiologists tend to call a pine cone. But following Janice Yellen, I also agree that this is likely a head of sorghum, a grain crop that was the main carbohydrate grown and eaten in the Kingdom of Meroe and still today in Sudan. And then the queen is bracketed on either side by 2 goddesses who are pouring out libations from vessels on their laps and wearing crowns that seek to identify them, perhaps This is a little bit worn, but maybe it is the throne that writes the name of Isis in the Egyptian script, or Nephthys, hard to say, it's a little bit worn. And then this being the crown of Hathor, but a crown that was adopted by the goddess Isis in the late period. So this looks a little busy at first, but I want to give you some idea of how these sites that I'm describing are situated in relation to each other geographically. So you'll have to imagine these two maps. The one on the left is showing the north. You'll see Lower Nubia here. And then the one on the right is showing Upper Nubia. And so here, I'm going to move this so I can see a little bit better and get my pointer working. So here's Lower Nubia closer to Egypt, Jebel Barkal circled here, and then Meroe there at the bottom. Sorry, this thing keeps getting in my way. Okay, good. So the first arrow is pointing to the Temple of Dhaka, where we have an inscription that is written in the Meroitic script that is an attestation of this ruling queen, Amani-Renas, her spouse, Taritakas, and Akinidad. So that is up very close to Egypt and the Temple of Philae, probably about 80 miles or so south of Philae. While this arrow that I've just clicked on the map on the right shows both the temple or the site of Meroe, and just below that, the site of Hammurabi. So I will show you a stela from that site. This arrow a bit further south is pointing to the site of Wad Ban Naka, where we saw that bark stand, and we'll see a stela from that site. And then the temple or the site of Naka that has many temples, Meroitic temples, including the so-called Lion Temple dedicated to the god Apetamak, and a temple to the god Amun. So just to give you an idea of the vast territory that these Meroitic kings and queens were claiming dominion in, building temples in, dedicating stelae and other sacred objects. Okay, so let's start with the Meroitic queens as queen mothers. I'm going to divide this talk according to the titles held by these queens, either kandake, being the queen mother, and then later I'll talk about those who held the title as sole ruler. You'll note that two of these queens held both titles, so I will talk about them in each section. So the kandakes that I'm focusing on are Amani-Renas, who ruled around 50 BC, and then Amanishakheto around 10 BCE, and finally Amanitore in about 30 CE or AD. In this image, we see Amanitore embraced by the god Amun. And he's in his ram-headed manifestation. She's reaching out to touch him. He's grasping both her elbow and her shoulder. And you'll see in the queen's left hand that she's holding the Ankh sign, the Egyptian way of writing the word for life. And so this is an allusion to the queen coming together with the god to create offspring who will be eligible then to be considered to sit on the throne of Meroe. There at the bottom is just what this title kandake looks like in the Meroitic script. It's read, cursive Meroitic script, I should say. It's read from right to left. So this thing that looks like a 3 with a tail is the letter K. And this is an alphabetic script, I should say. So quite a departure from the Egyptian hieroglyphic script and the Demotic script from which it is developed. So we see here K and then D, the letter N is not written, another K, and then the letter E to write kandake. And then this L is just for the definite article, meaning the kandake. So here's our first attestation of Amanirenas, who, again, according to Janice Yellen, is not depicted in any imagery. And so this will stand in for this earliest kandake. In the inscription that you see on the left, it's again written in that Meroitic cursive and surrounded in a cartouche, which is the typical object that surrounds the king's name in ancient Egypt. The text names Tariticus, so her husband, who holds the title Kore, he is the ruler, while Amanirenas is given as kandake, so the queen mother, and then Akinidad has the Meroitic title Pakara, which probably designates him as the heir apparent, although he never comes to rule. And it also is a title that's associated with governor of the northernmost area of Nubia, where Dhaka is. In Meroe, it was called the province of Akin. And so this inscription was just found on the facade of this Egyptian temple built in Nubia. And it's a way that these Meroitic rulers were claiming ownership of this space, if you will. So here is an image from the interior walls of the funerary chapel of Queen Amanishakheto, and we see her very regally seated upon a lion throne. Let me see if I can get my laser pointer going. So here she's seated on a lion throne. She is wearing this typical Atef crown of Meroitic royalty, the long coat and a cord. You can see this cord hanging down here and the royal sash. So she's very much depicted as the ruler. She has her fierce, let me get rid of this, pointed fingernails that was characteristic of these queens. And I use this to depict her as kandake because the worshipers around her who are burning incense before her nostrils and holding up a hand in reverence behind her head are probably her offspring. So sons on either side, and then daughters to the left offering palm branches, which are a symbol of life in this culture. So that's Amanishakheto as kandake. I'm showing this pair, Amanitore on the right and Natakamani on the facade of the Temple of Amun at that site called Naka. And they're very much co-rulers. They are jointly dispatching enemies of the Kingdom of Meroe. And perhaps you can see beneath their feet, beneath the king, Natakamani on the left, is a lion mauling a prisoner. And underneath the queen, a lion reaching out to grab some of those bound prisoners. So that was Amanitore on the front of the temple in a posture very much as an aggressor, a powerful ruler. Here on the side of this temple at Naka, we see her more in the role of kandake, where they are before the lion god, Meroitic lion god, Apetamak on the left. We see first the king. He's again holding that pine cone in his right hand. And then in the center, of this group of worshipers is the kandake Amanitore, and right behind her is one of several princes who are prominently portrayed around these Meroitic temples. So this is very much Amanitore in her role as kandake. All right, so Meroitic queens as sole rulers. So we'll have some familiar names coming up now. Both Amani Reinas and Amanishakheto held also this title of Kore there at the bottom of the screen on the left. And then Nowitamak, we never see her as kandake, but she is that sole ruler and holds the title Kore. The image that I chose for this slide is Amanishakheto there in the center. Again, very thick, very voluptuous. She is wearing the necklace of the 3 ram's heads of Amun. You can see on both her and the goddess who is ushering her into the presence of Apetamak on the right. On both of the females, the queen and the goddess, you can see a very curly, natural afro. The goddess is bare-breasted, as is probably the queen. But this is an image from a stela that is showing the sole ruler, Amanishakheto, being ushered into the presence of divinity, and thus alluding to their allowing her to hold the throne of the Kingdom of Meroe. So here is the stela at that site of Hamadab that I showed on that opening map. So really walking distance from the capital city, probably about 6 kilometers. And it has so many lines of Meroitic cursive text that probably relays the Meroitic side of the story when Meroe met Rome in battle. Octavian's troops having conquered Egypt in about 30 BCE, leading to the death of Cleopatra VII. Rome got control of Egypt and then tried to push south into Nubia several years later and was met with military force from the Kingdom of Meroe. And it's quite possible, quite likely, that the Meroitic side of the history of those series of battles is recorded in this text that we can not yet read. I tried to give you a little bit more of a close-up here. Still hard to see, but we see a male and a female figure standing before a god and a goddess. It is Amani Reinas is the female and Akinidad is the male. At this point, Taritakas, we have to assume, has died, and Amani Reinas now holds the title of Kore. If anyone's interested, this object is in the British Museum, and there's the museum object number there. So a little bit of the Greek side of this history of the conflict between Rome and Meroe. Since we can't read the Meroitic cursive script on the Hamadab stela, we'll have to go with Strabo from his Geographica, and he was contemporary with these incredible queens who ruled in Meroe. We'll just place him in the early 1st century CE. So I'll take this quote from the Geographica and read it out loud to you, but I've substituted some interpretations of his language. So he says, quote, "But the Ethiopians," and one must always remember when Greeks or Greek writers say Ethiopia, they're talking about Nubia. So the Ethiopians attacked the Thebais and the garrison of the 3 cohorts at Syene, and by an unexpected onset took Syene and Elephantine and Philae and enslaved the inhabitants. The the generals of Queen Candace. So here we should be hearing kandake, who was the ruler of the Ethiopians in my time, a masculine sort of woman and blind in one eye, end quote. So that's the sort of Greek take on a fearless and fierce queen who actually led her troops into battle against the Roman troops attempting to push south into Nubia. So what about those toppled statues that were carried away by the Meroitic invaders into southern Egypt? We have this head of Caesar Augustus, who was known as Octavian when his troops invaded Egypt. Apparently put up statues of himself all over the country, and this was taken home as a trophy, if you will, by the Meroitic forces when they then left Egypt after attacking deep up into Egypt. And this head was found buried under the steps of a building in the capital city of Meroe. I think it is M292. Often called the Temple of Victory because of some images that I will show you shortly that were painted on the interior walls. And there's the British Museum object number. Very interesting in their description of this object. They omit much of the history of how it came to be in Meroe. So here's just a little bit of the painted decoration from the interior of that building M292. And what it shows, I'll show you a larger image on the next slide, but it shows bound prisoners. And this is probably as the result of conflict, military conflict between Rome and Meroe. And we see a series of people with their arms, prisoners with their arms pinioned behind them. This one on the top on the left has been identified as possibly a Roman soldier who was captured and taken as a prisoner to Meroe. So I'll just show you a larger image of this scene. It's said to be, or it used to be, on the right-hand wall of this temple in Meroe City. Unfortunately, now it's been lost, but an early visitor did a watercolor. And so along the top, you can see royalty here, standing before seated gods. And then under the feet are these same bound prisoners who you can see much larger size and painted. And I like to point out that the god Bes is here under the throne. And on this side, an image that's called Sematawi in Egypt, the very important concept of the unification of the two lands. So maybe an allusion to when Kush was able to extend control over Egypt during the earlier Napatan 25th dynasty. But really beautifully rendered bound prisoners. They're clearly painted in characteristic ways so that people in antiquity, at least, who would see them would immediately be able to identify which ethnic groups were under the dominion of the Kingdom of Meroe, and they're shown sort of thrown down at the feet of the ruler. So on to Amanishakheto as a kore, a sole ruling queen. This line drawing shows the full body, where the photo at the bottom is showing what the actual carved relief on the facade of her funerary pylon at the North Cemetery at Meroe. So we see this very large, very voluptuous queen in the traditional royal attire of a coat, the tasseled cords, this cloak over her right shoulder and down to her left hip. She's dispatching enemies with a spear, and she has her name written in a cartouche above her head. But I listed these other attestations of Amanishakheto as Kore just to show the geographic range of her building projects, her political control, and her involvement as a ruler at Meroe. So there are blocks from Temple T, originally built by Taharko of the 25th dynasty, the Napatan period, at the Third Cataract at Kawa, a granite stela from Meroe City, her cartouches found at a palace at Wad Ban Naka, that other sacred site by Meroe, a stela from Qasr Ibrahim, far north at the Second Cataract, this cartouche that you're seeing in the image on the left from the pylon of her funerary pyramid, and also an offering table from that same royal burial. So very well attested queen. And not only in buildings, but in this amazing cache of jewelry that was found by the explorer, looter, treasure hunter, Giuseppe Ferlini, who had the terrible habit of blowing the tops off of these royal pyramids, thinking he was going to find more gold buried in them. But this image on the right shows all of the objects that were found in association with the burial of this Meroitic queen, Amanishakheto, this beautiful bracelet in the center that shows probably the goddess Isis in her winged form, which was very popular in Meroe. And then on the left, this beautiful stela, where you see Amanishakheto on the right, and the goddess, Meroitic goddess Amasimi on the left, who has not only facial markings, she is also wearing a very beautiful short natural afro that mirrors that of the queen, and she's breathing out Ankh signs, the Egyptian hieroglyphic sign for life, from her nostrils into the nostrils of the queen. And then really beautiful examples of Meroitic hieroglyphs that say simply on the left, this is Amasimi, and this one says, this is Amanishakheto. I should say it's so many fewer examples of Meroitic hieroglyphs. The bulk of all of the inscriptions that we have in the Meroitic language are in that cursive script, which I believe we'll see again. Okay, so then on to our third ruling queen holding this title, Kore. This is the image on the right that was used to advertise this talk. And we see Nawida Mak again seated on that lion throne. You can see that under her skirt, the lion head popping out. And her name, the arrows indicating her name is in a cartouche, so indicating this is a name of a ruler. Nawida Mak, it says there. And then above this young man's head, we're told that his name is Yektarete, if I get that right. And he again holds this title that we saw associated with Akinidad. He's a Pekara, which it changes over time, but it is probably referring to him as the royal heir. So then it is his job and his honor to make funerary offerings to the deceased queen. But he's also then serving as governor or a ruler of this northern province of Akin, that is Lower Nubia. And then on the left, just a sketch of a beautiful gold statue of the queen that is now held in the National Museum in Khartoum. Highly recommend a visit there if you ever have a chance to be in Sudan. You'll see it's missing its head. It's probably about 9 or 10 inches tall. You can see that the queen is wearing all of the traditional regalia of Meroitic royalty now, the coat that tasseled cord, which is hanging down in the back, the image on the right, the sash from her right shoulder to her left hip. And this used to be attached to a base that had Meroitic cursive script, a text around the bottom, letting us know that this was in fact Nowidamak, and she's holding the title of Kore. And that piece, which had unfortunately been separated from the statue, is in the Allen Memorial Art Museum in Ohio, in Oberlin, Ohio. One day I will get there to see that if it is on display. So I just want to close with this really powerful image of a young woman in Khartoum. Her name is Ala Salah. She was a university student at the University of Khartoum in Sudan while the protest against the former dictator happened in 2019. And in fact, these protests got large enough to topple that dictatorship. But what is pertinent to this lecture is the way in which this photo went viral on social media. Many of you have probably seen it or heard me talk about it in other lectures. But she's labeled as the kandake in recognition of her leadership role and the way that she galvanized the crowd. She was chanting in Arabic, "What do my people want?" And the crowd responds, "Revolution." And she's very much hearkening back to traditional attire of Nubian women from maybe the 40s and 50s, so not antiquity. But the gold earrings and the white cover, it's just powerful that this concept of a powerful woman as leader lives on in this modern country of Sudan. So we have the kandake depicted here in this photo. And then I'm making a plug for a publication that I wrote. It was published in 2021 and is available on my academia.edu page. If you want to read more about these amazing women from antiquity, and if you want to get sort of more granular detail. And with that, I will stop and gladly take questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Ashby, for your fascinating talk. I would like to now invite our YouTube audience to submit your questions for Dr. Ashby. In the meantime, I wanted to start with the topic of the Meroitic burial patterns. I was wondering if you could speak more about the royal burials at Gebel Barkal and at Meroe. If you could tell us what are some of the theories behind, as to why Meroitic queens would want to be buried at either location. Can we see any sort of patterns in the burial location between these two settlements? Thank you.
All right, yeah. So George Reisner from Harvard excavated almost everything in Nubia. He was amazingly productive man. So he excavated both at Napata, Karma, and Meroe, so all three major sites. And he had the idea that turned out to be mistaken, that they were two different royal families, maybe competing contemporary royal families. And so they would each be buried in their traditional home of origin. That has turned out to not be true. So now we need to sort of come up with other ideas about why this alternation of burial site. And I have read it written that maybe some of these queens who were engaging the Romans in battle, so trying to defend the northern borders of the Kingdom of Meroe from Roman aggression, would have chosen to be buried further to the north, sort of as a statement of, this is our land, I'm here eternally, making a claim to the place. I don't think that there has been sort of a definitive answer yet about why some chose to be buried in the north and some in the south. But I will just say that even in the Napatan period, so that second phase, we do have royal family members who are already choosing to be buried at Meroe, at the south cemetery there. So it seems to be something that happens for a really long period, that both options are available to rulers. If I understood the second part of your question right, Brooke, it's about how the burials are situated or laid out, like each individual one. I will just go ahead and answer that, or you can correct me if I misunderstood.
It was just about, the difference of being buried at these two settlements. But yeah, if you would like to speak more about the individual burials, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, so what Reisner did, again, at the North Cemetery, the way that, since we don't have any such king list like the Egyptologists are blessed to have, that list the rulers chronologically, a lot of this had to be sort of extrapolated from material culture. And so really the genius of George Reisner was to sort of think about how the burials were located in this site. So he understood that the oldest burials were placed in the prime location, so up on this ridge where those three that I showed you, and then succeeding rulers would have to choose perhaps less ideal locations, and so they were buried sort of further down the hill. I do want to just reiterate that the essential elements of a Meroitic royal burial were, of course, the pyramid, but always also this funerary chapel on the east side, which lets us know that they were doing something similar to what we see in Egypt, like the tradition of making offerings to deceased rulers was really vital. And so the offering table, which I did not show from Amanishakheto, but almost all of these rulers had offering tables. There probably would have been ba birds placed at the burial, and the interior of the funerary chapels show what the processions of carrying the body to the royal burial ground would have looked like. And we just see so many people walking in procession, often holding palm branches, and very much vital, pouring libations for the deceased ruler.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask, so you spoke about Amanirrenas as this warrior queen, and I wanted to ask, do we see other Meroitic queens being presented in the same way? And is this a more common? And do we see any similarities in the way that both women and men are presented and referenced in these texts that recount battles and war?
Yeah, so that one, it was just a sketch, but of Amanishakheto shown sort of larger than life and very feminine looking, but holding a group of bound prisoners and getting ready to dispatch them with a spear. So she succeeds Amanirrenas, and she still is presenting herself as a warrior queen, and probably also still had to fend off incursions by the Romans in the northern part of her territory, not to mention sort of the ongoing battles that rulers of the Kingdom of Meroe fought against other ethnic groups, other culture groups that also lived in Nubia. I haven't spoken about them at all, but certainly those two queens are shown very much as warrior queens, Amanirrenas and Amanishakheto. And then from that pylon from the Temple of Amun at Naka, we see Natakamani and Amanitore in these mirrored images. So that was very much in the conception of Meroitic royalty, that the queen was not just a baby producer or like a pretty face or the one who shakes the rattle for Hathor in the temple, but that she also was out there dispatching enemies, leading troops into battle. And Strabo's description of his Queen Candace, so she's not named, but it's, I think the consensus is pretty much that was Amani Reynas, that she's one-eyed and might be that she lost that eye in battle. Yeah. So these queens are both very feminine looking. We see their breasts and allusions to their ability to bring forth and nurture life, but we also see them sort of dripping in gold jewelry with fabulous long pointed nails, and then also as warriors leading troops into battle or dispatching enemies. So
that's fascinating. Thank you. So we have a few YouTube questions coming in. Are the markings that you mentioned on the face of the goddess Amasini indications of tattooing, henna markings, or scarification as seen in some contemporary African peoples?
Yeah, so that last section of the comment is right on. It is facial scarification, and I am going to imagine, at least in contemporary periods, it's meant to really identify a person as belonging to a particular group. And I think if we knew more about the different ethnicities living in Nubia during the time that the stela was made, it might identify this goddess as being associated with a particular ethnic group, maybe even the royalty living in Meroe. So yes, very much scarification. I write and think a lot about tattooing in earlier northern Nubian groups called C groups, and they did a lot of body tattooing, but also scarification. So it's a very widespread practice on the African continent, because African skin does this interesting thing when it's cut, is produce a raised scar called a keloid. I have a couple of them myself, not intentional. And so this sort of reaction of skin of African people makes it possible to make very dramatic markings through scarification. And I'm sure that's what we're seeing on the face of Amasini.
And then we have a question about the portrayal of women in Kemet versus the portrayal of kandakes in Punt, and why women in Kemet were not portrayed with that same full figure as the kandakes and Punt women.
Yeah, it might have just been actual physical difference. Like you see, if you travel in Sudan, in Ethiopia and Eritrea, where Punt probably is located, or in Kemet itself, you just see that people look different. There's sort of a continuity of a look, but it changes as you move from south to north and vice versa. So I really do believe that these ancient artists were depicting the women as they looked. Some scholars think that it's just sort of more ideological and making a statement about their physical power, their spiritual and political power. And I think that is also true. But I also think in these more southern places that the women were just larger. That's just how they were naturally, and that was, of course, appreciated as the beauty aesthetic.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Ashby. I want to thank you again for this wonderful talk. I would also like to invite our audience to our next Women and Gender Performance in the Ancient Middle East lecture, which will be on May 11th at 9:30 a.m. Dr. Lauren McCormick will present To See and Be Seen, Looking a Central Yet Underappreciated Attribute of the Jordan Pillar Figurine.